Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for joining in here. Today's topic is strawberry production. I'm going to try and keep this short. I have a tendency to go long, but we'll have plenty of time for questions when we're done. My email is there. You can contact me that way. I also have a Facebook page for my horticulture program here over at the Robinson Center for Appalachian Resource Sustainability in Breathitt County, the old quicksand station. I do think that strawberries are an excellent crop for homeowners, also for commercial production if people are interested. For homeowners, you can start out very simply just with a strawberry pot or one of the strawberry pyramids as shown here on this title slide. You're not going to get a lot of production, but you're going to get enough strawberries that you can enjoy eating them, put them on your cereal and just eat them with a little milk or cream in a bowl. Great way to start out. The advantage to this over starting out larger is you'll find that birds and deer and squirrels tend to love strawberries. So if those could be potential problems for you, I would recommend starting out small, give them a start. They really aren't very difficult to grow if you keep a few things in mind, and we'll address those as we go along. I want to thank Dr. Strang for sharing some of the photos I'm going to be using here. And I've listed 3 good information sources on this slide. The first one is from our Center for Crop Diversification. There's a lot of individual links on that page. That's really geared towards the commercial producer, somebody that wants to be a matted row strawberry grower, plasticulture strawberry grower. The second link there through the plant pathology department is a PDF of a publication we put together called Home Fruit Production. Don't think any hard copies of that are available anymore, but you can always print that off yourself or just read the PDF online. It's an excellent publication. And then the third reference that I have there is for disease and insect control for home fruit production. It also has some organic options listed on that publication as well. It's not strictly limited to strawberries, so if you grow other fruit, apples, grapes, brambles, I'd encourage you to look at that publication as well for some good information. The strawberry that most of us are going to grow is actually a hybrid of the Chilean or beach strawberry crossed with the Virginia wild strawberry. There's a few other strawberry varieties that can get mixed in there along that, but I would say gut feeling 90% plus of all the strawberries that are commercially available are strictly hybrids of these 2 different species. So keep in mind that if you wanted to grow strawberries, it'd be kind of like trying to grow apples. If you planted the seeds from the strawberries, you wouldn't get the same strawberry you started out with because they are hybrids. Keep in mind here with the site selection, we do have a few things to keep in mind, but any of your garden soils that are good for vegetable gardens or other fruit production are going to be good for strawberry production as well. One of the first things to keep in mind, however, is air drainage. That's what this little illustration shows. You don't want to plant in a frost pocket at the lowest spot on your landscape or in an area where there's a dam of a hedge or a fence or something that's going to block that cold air from draining off, because these are early season crops primarily. I will talk about the difference between June bearing strawberries, ever bearing strawberries, and day neutral strawberries as we go on. But primarily I recommend the traditional June bearing strawberries. They're an early season crop, a cool season crop. They start growing as soon as it starts warming up sometime late March, early April, and you'll get fruit production sometime around mid-May until the end of June. You want a well-drained soil, which is one of the advantages to those strawberry pyramids, is you can fill that up with good soil and you get good drainage. Strawberries can be susceptible to root rots. There's another disease called leather rot that's particularly a problem in poorly drained soil. So you want a soil that's fairly well drained, good soil depth, because strawberries do have a fairly deep root system. If you have 6 to 8 to 12 inches of good soil, that would be adequate. But as we saw in that first title slide, you can grow strawberries in a strawberry pot. It just requires a lot of watering during the season and that to keep them growing well. Irrigation availability is not as critical as some other fruits. It's kind of nice to have it if we do get a dry year, and particularly in the planting year. You want to have something where you don't have to tote water too far away to grow your plants and things. But as we've seen most of the spring here, we're getting plenty of rain here. This was a fairly decent strawberry year for our plasticulture growers, but it got very wet and things. So typically for strawberries, again, the June bearing as opposed to the day neutrals and ever bearers, there's going to be plenty of moisture in the spring that you don't have to worry too much about irrigating them. Final point, just general fruit, all fruit put together. Don't guess soil test. pH of 6.5, that slightly acid soil. Bring your phosphorus, potassium, and magnesium up to recommended levels, your pH, any adjustments that need to be done. Get those done the year before planting, and you should be in good shape. I want to talk a little bit about the different production systems. Matted rows, that's what most of you are probably familiar with, the traditional system that you see there on the left photograph. The right photograph illustrates the annual plasticulture system. It's not meant to be a replacement for the matted row system. It just serves to extend the season. And rather than extending the season later in the year, it extends it earlier in the season. So we get strawberries earlier in the season than we do from our traditional matted row varieties. 30 years ago, when I first started working with extension, we were trying to always look for those late strawberry varieties that would give us good strawberry quality into early July or even mid-July. But then the spotted wing Drosophila became an issue, and we no longer really try to push strawberry production into the summer season, because then you're going to have potentially issues with the spotted wing Drosophila. But the traditional matted row strawberries, they're typically done producing, except some of the very latest varieties like Ovation. They'll be done with production before the spotted wing Drosophila becomes a problem. Plasticulture strawberries come on even earlier. The plasticulture system is much more expensive system, about $10,000 an acre as opposed to $2,000 an acre or $2,500 an acre for the matted row system. But your potential yields are much higher. Also, the strawberries are sold at a higher price because they are the earliest, first locally available strawberries, so you can get a better price for them. So happy to talk to anybody about commercial strawberry production if you want, but let's talk a little bit about the three main classes of strawberries. The June bearing are the traditional most common strawberries. They're the ones that will come on from late May through June into early July. You get good yields off of them compared to the everbearing and the day neutrals. But the thing to keep in mind with that is the planting year, you need to go through and pick off all the blooms off those plants that planting year. That allows the mother plant, which you plant, to throw out runners, which forms that matted row system. The everbearing, they'll produce a crop in the fall of the planting year, as well as the day neutrals. The difference being everbearing, Fort Laramie and Quinault are two common varieties that you get a crop, early spring crop, and you get a late fall crop. Whereas with your day neutral varieties, Seascape, Tribute, TriStar are common varieties for that. The theory with that is that you'll get strawberry production, a small, low level of strawberry production all season long from late spring through early fall. So but in practicality here in Kentucky, if you go further north in the United States, you see more of a separation between the everbearing and the day neutrals. But here in Kentucky, we get so hot in the summertime, strawberries are a cool season crop. Your day neutrals are going to shut down when we start hitting temperatures of 85 degrees or higher, and you're not going to get that midsummer crop that you would get if you were up into New York, New England, Minnesota, Wisconsin, places like that. So functionally here in Kentucky, everbearing and day neutral function the same way. You get a little crop in the late spring and hopefully a little crop in the late fall. The thing to keep in mind with that late fall crop, which is why I don't recommend them for commercial production, is because you are going to have a very high spotted winged Drosophila population, and you're going to have to fight those insect problems. People don't like maggots in their strawberries, whereas with the traditional June-bearing varieties, those, as I said, you're not going to have issues with the spotted winged Drosophila typically, except for some of the very latest varieties. Your traditional June-bearing varieties, things like Early Glow, Jewel, Honey Oi, All-Star, Red Chief, those aren't used in the plasticulture system. We've tried them in the plasticulture system now for almost 20 years. I've been doing the plasticulture system. They just don't produce well. We have specific varieties that we use that function like a traditional June-bearing variety, but your standard ones that I would recommend for Kentucky for a matted row system don't work well in that system. And this slide here is just meant to illustrate the difference. When you plant that mother plant, this was planting year, Dr. Strang let one of the mother plants produce some fruit. And as you can see, it just didn't produce many daughter plants off of the runners. So you're really impacting your ability to form that matted row. That's why you need to remove all bloom from your traditional June-bearing varieties in the spring of the planting year. With your everbearers or day neutrals, if you wanted to try those, the thing to keep in mind, you need to remove the bloom for about 4 to 6 weeks initially once they start blooming. And because they aren't sensitive to day length, that will give the plant a chance to establish. And then after that 4 to 6 weeks, 1 month, 1.5 months, then you can let it start producing fruit, and you'll get some fruit for the remainder of the year. Some recommended June-bearing varieties that do well. I like to tell people strawberries are kind of like wine grapes. What does well in one location 2 miles down the road might not be the best variety for that location. Well, probably my 2 favorites listed on here are Early Glow. Great flavor, not a good berry for commercial production, but for a home gardener, it's an excellent, good disease resistance. We say good flavor, but I say it's the best tasting strawberry out there. And it does come on early, so spotted winged Drosophila is not going to be a problem. And number 2 on that list is Flavorfest. It's a new one released by Dr. Kim Lewers from the USDA breeding program over in Maryland. Excellent. Mid-season comes on probably 14 days or so after Early Glow. Excellent flavor. I'd put it right next to Early Glow. Good color, good disease resistance and things. So those are my top 2 favorite on there. Cavendish is okay. It's not one of my favorite ones. Delmarva, that actually comes from the Delaware, Virginia region. Jewel is a good one that does well for people. Red Chief, All-Star. Ovation, you're getting into a late season, and the spotted winged Drosophila might be an issue for you in some years if you try and push that season way to the end of June and things. But I would recommend, if you want to just try a few different varieties, typically your county agents will have a fruit purchasing season, and they'll get in some different varieties of strawberries. They're typically sold in bundles of 25, which could be a lot for a home gardener. But if you get up with your neighbor and one of you orders one variety, another orders a different variety, you can split those up and try a couple different varieties that way, see what you like and things. Things to keep in mind when planting. Trim off the dead ends on the plant roots, but don't shorten them up too much. Strawberries actually have a fairly long plant root compared to some of our fruit crops that come in, and you want to keep as many of those roots as you can. Keep the plants moist while planting, just don't let them dry out. Don't fold up the roots to get them into a shallow hole. That's why you need a fairly deep loose soil so that you can get all those roots growing down, because if you bend them over into like an L shape, they're going to be more prone to dying off, drying out, and everything else, more prone to damage from hoeing and things. The big issue where people run into with planting strawberries that I've seen here is what this figure is meant to illustrate. They'll either plant them too shallow with some of the roots sticking out, and then they just flop over and the plants dry out, or they plant them too deep. There's the root portion of the plant, and then there's a little neck or crown, and then the leaves come right out of the top of that crown. And you want that neck area even with the soil surface. So that's the main issue that people run into with planting strawberries. They either plant too deep or too shallow. Strawberries are self-pollinated. You can get better pollination if you have some insects coming in helping to pollinate, but they are self-pollinated through wind, and they can be grown in containers. They are a member of the rose family, so they have a similar flower structure. The first bloom produces the largest berry. It's the king bloom. That's very critical for our commercial growers because that's the bloom that they're always frost protecting. They don't want to lose that one because that's the money-making berry. Everything else is designed to cover the cost, but that first berry is the one that makes them the money. You can see that illustrated here on this picture of the strawberry. Early glow is notorious for this, which is why I don't recommend it as a commercial variety for matted row. That first berry is big, delicious, excellent, and then all the other secondary, tertiary, quaternary berries that come after that are small. They still taste great. They're just tiny little berries that economically don't make sense to pick in a commercial operation, but for a homeowner, they're certainly worth the effort to pick them because they do taste so good. Frost protection is critical as these plants are early producers. You can always tell when a strawberry bloom has gotten damaged because they get that black center in it that you see here. That's what our commercial growers, they either use floating row covers or they'll go out and make ice to cover the blooms to protect them from freezing, which doesn't really make sense. But an open bloom can handle 30 degrees without damage, and ice doesn't get below 32 degrees if they're making it properly. So putting ice on an open strawberry bloom can actually protect it. As a home gardener, use if you have some of the old tobacco blankets or something, you can use that. Flannel sheets work well. Avoid using plastic because plastic will transmit the cold right through the plastic to the bloom and will damage the bloom. But you could even put a bushel basket if you just have a small planting. If you have them growing in a strawberry pot, you could haul it into the garage on a cold night and protect it that way. Just keep in mind that you will potentially need to do some frost protection. We had an unusually late frost this year and hurt some of our growers. Critical temperatures for strawberry buds. The most sensitive, of course, is the open bloom, and they have a structure where they face up so that cold air settles down, unlike a blueberry bloom that the bloom hangs down and they're protected somewhat. So 30 degrees open flower, you're going to get damage. Small green fruit can actually handle 28 degrees. The popcorn bloom where the cluster is just opening, but the buds are still tightly closed, they can handle anywhere from 22 to 27 degrees, depending upon the state. And then just as early as the crown starts to open up and the flower truss, the buds start to come out, they can handle 10 degrees. So strawberries are pretty tough little plants. Honestly, strawberries are a weed, and that's one reason why people often run into trouble with them is they don't treat them as weeds and they aren't as aggressive with them as they need to be, which I'll talk about in a moment. Mulching commercially, you can certainly do that, or small home planting, but make sure you use clean straw, not hay, not straw that has seeds in it, because what you see here is what happens if you do that. They didn't have clean straw, and now they have grass, straw rye growing between their beds of strawberries, and they've got a mess there. Mulch is also used to prevent the heaving of the plants in the planting year, slow down spring growth so you don't get too early of a growth, protect bloom from frost, reduce weed growth, conserve moisture, all something to think about commercially. This is where most home gardeners fall down in their strawberry production. If you have a nice healthy strawberry plant, all of those mother plants are just going to keep throwing off runners every year as a means of reproducing. And eventually you get this great big thick mat like you see on the left there. And you need to go through and thin down that row every year, rejuvenate the planting. So you thin the row back down, let the mother plant throw out some more daughter plants, throw a little bit of dirt up on the crown. And this renovation is done right after bloom ends. So usually first or second week in July is when it's done. If you set your little push mower high enough, if your planting is big enough, you can mow them off, the leaves right off the top. Don't get into the crown where you cut it off. And the plants, as I said, they're cool season plants, so they'll go dormant during the summertime. And then as it starts to cool off in the fall, they'll start to regrow again. But this is where most people run into things. The biggest weed in a strawberry patch is usually other strawberry plants crowding out the strawberries so that they just don't produce very well. Insects and diseases really aren't that big of a problem in Kentucky for strawberry growers. There's a couple things, and I'll talk about them. Minimally sprayed. I've been here 10 years. I was in Ohio for 10 years prior to that, and started back in late 89, early 90, working for Cornell as an extension county agent, and we were doing strawberries back then. And foliar diseases from New York all the way down here to Kentucky, I have yet to see a foliar situation that really requires spraying. It might look a little bit ugly, and I asked Dr. Strang about this as well, since he's been in Kentucky for many years, and he said that he has never really seen a strawberry planting that justified spraying for controlling foliar diseases. You'll get some leaf spotting and a little bit of leaf scorch, but it's never significant enough to affect the health of the strawberry plant. So unless you just really want nice, pretty, perfect green leaves, it's not really an issue. Your most important spray out of all of your sprays for strawberries is a spray to try to control botrytis, that fungal disease that gives you the fuzzy gray berries if they sit in your refrigerator too long or on your counter too long. That's botrytis, that's gray mold. And that would be your most important spray. It is listed in that home production guide, Captan. It's not the best spray out there, but for a home gardener, it will work well. Commercially, we have some really good things that one spray at bloom is all they need, and it will give them excellent control of botrytis fruit rot. Just check your planting for problems. Slugs will be a problem. Slugs like strawberries just as much as you do. They're easy to control. You can either use their traditional pie tin set level with the soil, put some stale cheap beer in it and the slugs will crawl in there and die, or you can take a small piece of plywood, just prop it up with a little stick or something. The slugs will crawl under that. As the sun comes up, you flip it over and you can get rid of your slugs that way. So slugs are a problem, particularly in a damp year. In a drier year, they're not as much of a problem, but slugs can be a problem. There are commercial baits. I don't like to use them myself because they're pretty toxic, and I think there's easier way to control slugs that are less toxic. Grubs can be an issue in the planting year. I should have mentioned this earlier, but when you're trying to determine a location for your strawberry planting, don't follow a location that it was in sod the previous year. If you have a corner of your yard that says that would be a good place to grow strawberries, you need to get out there now, burn it off with some glyphosate and kill all the sod so that you can work that up, because those grubs, the Japanese beetle grubs, rose chafer beetles, June beetles, that's what those larvae are. They're the larvae of those beetles, and they love sod. So you don't want to follow sod with strawberries the following year, because those grubs will come up and eat off the roots. Birds and deer can be a problem, but you can put fencing or netting over that, especially in a small planting, and control them. Sap beetles shouldn't be a problem for you. What that tells you, if you have those little sap beetles in your strawberry planting, it means you're not eating enough strawberries, because they'll only be a problem if you don't get all the ripe strawberries out of your patch. Commercially, we see it a lot in U-pick, where people just try to pick the biggest berries and leave the smaller ones behind, and then the sap beetles will come in. But those are your main insect problems. Slugs actually aren't insects, but those are your main pest problems. Leather rot is a disease, but if you control your moisture, that's not going to be a problem. Your biggest disease for strawberries is the Botrytis gray mold. Weed management, yes, you will have weeds in your strawberries. Buy a good quality hoe. Avoid one that's made out of cheap steel that bends the first time you hit weed. Not promoting Rogue over and other things, but that the first hoe there is specifically called a strawberry hoe. The tines coming up on top allow you to go right over top of the mother plant and hoe down both sides of that planting row, and then the wider blade lets you get in between the plants and things. You've got a long-handled Dutch hoe there in the middle. Invest in a good quality long-handled hoe so you don't ruin your back. Commercially, we don't really have good weed control options. The planting year, which is, we have some herbicides that we recommend, but you're still going to have to use a hoe commercially. So homeowner, commercial gardener, you're going to be hoeing weeds the planting year. And then, of course, a file to keep your hoe nice and sharp. You shouldn't be working up a sweat when you're hoeing. Your hoe should be nice and sharp. It doesn't have to be sharp enough to shave with, but they're not designed for cutting. They're designed for shaving those weeds off when they're young and tender and just sprouting, just shaving it across the surface of the soil. That way you protect your plant roots, but you kill your weeds off as well. Standard disclaimer where a specific trade name is mentioned, no endorsement is implied, nor discrimination intended towards any other similar suitable product. So even though I mentioned Rogue hoe, just a good quality steel hoe out there, other hoes use those as well. So that I actually think I kept myself almost to 20 minutes. I still went a little bit over, but I did better than previous ones. So happy to try and answer any questions anybody has.